Welcome to the WanderLearn Show. I'm your host, Tapon, here with Robert Edwards, Dr. Robert Edwards, who is the author of several books. But the one we're going to be discussing today is one that we've discussed in a previous podcast, which you can go in the upper right-hand corner if you're watching this on YouTube to see it, or go down to the show notes and find it. It was called Mallory Irvine and Everest, The Last Step But One. But we're going to start off with this podcast with a great announcement that we're exclusively reporting here on the WanderLearn Show. Dr. Robert Edwards, what would you like to announce?
Well, thank you, Francis. I would like to announce that I had just signed today a contract with Pen and Sword of England for a second book on Mallory and Irvine. And our working title is Mallory, Irvine, and Everest. Subtitle, Irvine's Story. And this will be a new book with new material entirely, and will be very much more focused on Andrew Irvine, and how it came that his boot and his remains were found last September on the central Rongbuk Glacier.
Excellent. I'm so excited to see that book and read it, of course. That will be coming out probably 2027, maybe?
Yes, 2027 would be the probable publication date.
Right. Excellent. So what we want to discuss today, we'll talk about that in a future episode for sure. There's a lot to be said, but Irvine and Mallory, they either got to the summit or they didn't. We don't know. But we wanted to talk about this discussion that you gave to the Consejo Nacional de Investigaciones Científicas y Técnicas in Mendoza, Argentina. You go over things that what we know and what we don't know.
Well, Francis, as you see, the presentation is divided into several parts. The first part addresses what is known with a reasonable certainty, or at least reasonable confidence, about the last climb of Mallory and Irvine. The second part is much more brief, since it outlines simply what we do not know. The scope of what we don't know is very large, but by definition, we have not much to say about it. And the third part of the presentation concerns a set of hypotheses which I presented to the audience in Mendoza, with my ideas about what we could conjecture about the last climb, for which there was a reasonable body of evidence.
The fourth thing is Irvine's journey.
Yes, indeed. The fourth part, related, and necessarily briefly at that time, and in fact even now necessarily briefly, because of the very minimal data that we possess. But as you know, in September 2024, a team sponsored by the National Geographic Society and led by Jimmy Chin, the filmmaker, found on the central Rongbuk Glacier a boot, a right boot, clearly a very old boot. Within the boot, a sock containing the laundry label with the name A.C. Irvine, and within the boot or the sock, some human remains or bones, which clearly can only be those of Andrew Irvine. And that is almost the sum total of what we know. There has been a complete media blackout on that discovery. National Geographic are not willing to disclose the most minimal data about the discovery, and therefore I've used my own techniques, mathematical approaches to construct Irvine's journey, which we can come back to.
Right, and there are two salient quotes here on your slide. One of them is by Occam, which I imagine is Occam's razor comes from. It is quote, "It is futile to do with more things that which can be done with less," which is one of your guiding principles. And the second guiding principle is from Sherlock Holmes, which is, quote, "Once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth."
Yes, indeed. I like to be guided by those two maxims.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about what we know, which is surprisingly, I mean, I guess it depends on your expectations. It could either be limited or a lot that we know about Mallory's climb with Irvine. We know this image is the last photo we ever took of them, which is in June 6, 1924, around 8 a.m. They left at Camp 4 at 23,000 feet, 7,000 meters on the North Pole. We know that. And we also know on June 7th, John Noel filmed Mallory and Irvine and two porters. I didn't know about the two porters, and then in the image you can see, if those who sing on YouTube, it seems to be like a Sherpa potentially. You put a little question mark there.
Yes, that's because I'm uncertain as to who was the second climber. I think it's reasonable to assume that Mallory was the leading climber, as he was in nearly all of his climbs. It's reasonable to assume that Irvine was the second, and that the Sherpa were leading up the group.
Why does it look? It looks reversed in your slide for some reason. It looks like Mallory's behind. Maybe I'm misreading the slide.
Not at all. The image is very misleading, and it certainly looks as if they are descending from a higher point. They are not. This is an image taken by John Noel from a position about 2 miles away on another mountain completely, on Changtse.
Oh.
Now, he was working with a 20-inch telephoto lens centered on approximately the first step of Mount Everest. But what you see in the left-hand part of the frame is in fact a bank of fog or cloud. Everest is in fact behind that fog or cloud, and the party moving from right to left in the frame, and indeed in the film itself, are in fact ascending. So they are ascending the north ridge and aiming for the northeast shoulder, which is out of the frame on the left. Behind that bank of fog, you have probably the first step.
Okay, totally different than what I expected. Okay.
Yes, indeed. The image is extremely misleading, but it is correct.
All right, let's move to the next slide then. The last messages, that this is again in the category of what we know. We know that these were the last messages officially that Mallory sent down, and they didn't have, surprisingly, they had no cell phones at the time and satellite communications, so they had to send old-fashioned handwriting, something that probably some kids today don't even know how to do. Okay, so on June 7th, the porters brought down two messages from Mallory, sorry, and what are the key takeaways of these messages? One of them says, quote, crossing the rock band under the summit pyramid or going up the skyline.
Well, I would say that the one addressed to Noel demonstrates very clearly that Mallory had two plans, a plan A and a plan B, and he had not yet decided on which plan would operate. And I imagine he did not know, and he would not decide until he was in a position visually to make that decision. The terms crossing the rock band under the pyramid and the terms skyline have been debated for more than a century, and I myself am not entirely sure what they mean. But I think at this juncture you can say there were two plans. There was a plan A, a plan B, and I think another important takeaway of these two messages is that, as you say, there were no smartphones, obviously, no cell phones. There was not even a radio. The only way to communicate was with porters, who had to bring handwritten messages down. And so we really enter into an area of the unknown where we simply do not know. The moment that Mallory and Irvine left Camp 4, nothing could be known. Nothing could be known about when they arrived at any given place, when they left from any given place, what they took from one place to another, what they carried on the final climb, what time they left. None of this is known.
Speaking about, sorry for interrupt, but one of the things that, speaking about timing we left, almost every single expert agrees that when Mallory wrote that he's going to be at maybe at the pyramid or skyline at 8 p.m., almost everybody agrees that he meant 8 a.m.
I think, yes, that's the only possible explanation. The 8 p.m.
It was a typo.
doesn't make any. Yes, it must be simply a mistake. There's no other possible explanation.
Let's go to the next slide, where Odell's sighting on June 8th. This is the most talked about sighting of all and controversial sighting, which is right before 1 p.m. on June 8th. So Odell allegedly was the last person to see Mallory and Irvine, and near the summit pyramid. And there's a great debate where exactly he was. Just go over briefly, since can be quite a long discussion. Just briefly hit the key points, the key takeaways of what we actually know.
What we know is that Odell, at a time 12:50 p.m., and presumably that time is accurate, he must have had a timepiece on his person, saw very briefly, for a period of what he recalls as about 5 minutes, Mallory and Irvine, whom he had no doubt he could recognize them individually. He could recognize Mallory and Irvine by their respective posture and their gait. He saw them at a place which he described at some length, but subsequently changed his descriptions over time, depending on the medium that he was addressing. Now, I think it's important to state that there is a school of thought that says he never made this sighting at all. He imagined it. That was a position that some climbers and some members of the British establishment took in the 1930s especially. And it's critical for one's understanding to make this assumption that either you accept Odell's sighting or you do not. I personally accept it. I have no reason to doubt it. I think the second important takeaway is his description of where he saw them. And he, in the most early descriptions, described that very clearly. He spoke about a snowfield that the two climbers crossed to reach a step that was on the ridge. He described them climbing the step in a very short period of time while he was watching them. In other words, literally within a 5-minute period. He was relatively sure he saw one climber reach the top of the step. He was not sure that he saw the other. That's the essence of the sighting.
That's what we know for sure. And we also know that he said the last step but one, which is the subtitle of your book.
He said that not in the first description, but in fact in the second, in December 1924, when writing for the Geographical Journal. That was the first time at which he said the last step but one. And of course, at that point, a school of thought arose that the last step but one meant what was then called the second step. Or at least what is in modern terms called the second step. It was called the second step then. We have a modern term which we call the third step, and that term did not exist in the 1920s.
Dr. Edwards, do we know that we found the ice axe of Irvine, or do we just know that we found either Sherpa's, Mallory's? Do we know it's Irvine's ice axe? I know there's a little bit of controversy there. What percentage of certainty, let's put it, since you like to talk about percentages, would you say you're 90% certain that it was Irvine's ice axe that we found?
I would say I'm 90% certain that it was an axe that was not used either by Mallory or Irvine in regular use. That's to say, it was neither Mallory's principal ice axe, nor was it Irvine's principal ice axe. It was a spare, probably one of dozens of spares available to the expedition, and probably intended to be used by a porter because of its very short length.
Okay, you're basing that assumption based on the length?
Yes, I would say I've seen the ice axe at the Alpine Club. I measured it myself. It is 95 centimeters long. Irvine's spare ice axe, which returned to England and is in the Shrewsbury School, is 43.5 or 110 centimeters long. And I did recently have the opportunity to look in the British Library in London, where I found a photograph of Mallory, which I had not seen before, carrying an ice axe, where one could see the full length of it. Thereby, I was able to measure that ice axe. It was 105 centimeters long. And so I'm obliged to infer that an ice axe of 95 centimeters was not the principal ice axe for either of these men. Well, the ice axe was without any doubt an ice axe from 1924, and therefore, with certainty, it's an ice axe which either Mallory or Irvine placed at that spot. There's no other possibility.
In your book, by the way, you emphasize quite clearly that you feel strongly that it was placed rather than dropped. In other words, not from a fall, it seemed to be more strategically placed, hand placed, rather than tumbling down and just randomly fell in this perfect spot.
Yes, I do believe that. The ice axe was in fact found, according to Eric Simonson, who first saw it. He said it was wedged under a boulder, which seems to me to rule out any possible fall. The two men who subsequently rediscovered it, that's to say Jake Norton and Tap Richards, in 1999, confirmed that they found it, I think they said, at the base of a boulder. I don't think they specifically said wedged. But again, I did not see anything in their descriptions which suggested a fall or an accidental
oxygen bottle. Let's talk about the oxygen bottle, which we got now on the screen.
Okay, the oxygen bottle was placed intentionally. That's beyond doubt. The oxygen bottle was certainly from 1924. That's beyond doubt. The oxygen bottle, as found, contained some oxygen, but it was never weighed, and therefore we have no way of knowing how much oxygen it contained. We know simply that when the climbers brought it down to base camp, they opened the valve. There was a hissing sound which told them that some oxygen had escaped. But the opportunity to make a measurement was lost. And the oxygen bottle now has disappeared. I think no one knows now where it is. And therefore we do not know and probably can never find out whether it had been placed full and lost its contents over time, or whether it had been placed empty, and therefore what was found was simply the remaining gas that had stayed there for 100 years.
Right. And we know that it was listed as one of the 5 bottles listed on Mallory's body. He had a note with what seems to be a list of 5 oxygen bottles, and number 9 was 4th on the list.
Yes, that's correct. The number 9 appears on that list. It's an assumption on everybody's part, including mine, that is indeed a list of oxygen bottles. It looks very much like it, and I cannot think what else it could be.
What does the 100 and 110 mean? Is that like pressure or?
Yes, those are pressures.
Okay.
The normal pressure, the full pressure of an oxygen bottle of this size would have been, I think, 110 atmospheres. And so on the list, you can see that 4 of them were full at the time when Mallory made this list, and 1 was almost full. The number 9 was apparently full when Mallory wrote this list.
Right. And okay. And of course, we never found the apparatus on Mallory or Irvine's body. We haven't found it, the entire body of Irvine. Let's move on to the next point. Describe this particular slide where it's kind of complicated for those who are looking at it. What are the key takeaways of what we know?
What we know, we know the location of Mallory's body within probably some tens of meters. The climbers who found his body, I think reasonably, have declined to give a an exact GPS for it, fearing tomb raiders and people coming to rob the body again.
One
So
second. Hold on. Speaking about tomb raiders, I've heard or read or seen on the internet that supposedly somebody went to the location of Mallory's body, and then it was no longer there, and that led to speculation that the Chinese or somebody has removed the body, thrown it down a mountain or whatever. That's no longer there, even though the people who found the body buried it, took it, then undid it to go look again, and then reburied it. And it was supposedly left there. So do you have any information as far as what we know, whether the body is still there, Mallory's body?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, there's no evidence whatsoever that the body has been moved.
Okay.
None
whatsoever. So those who are claiming that they searched for it and couldn't find it, it's possible that they just were not looking in the right place, potentially.
Yes, I haven't even seen those reports, so I cannot comment. But I repeat that there's no evidence whatsoever that the body has been moved by any party.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, and we also, so this is again talking about things that we know, and we know that they also found a watch on Tom Pollard. Found a watch on Mallory, which had run down. There's very little that we can glean from that data either.
Yes, I think the takeaways are fairly brief. There was no artifact on or near Mallory's body that could throw any light on where he had been previously. The altimeter, although it has been studied like runes, like an oracle, tells us nothing. The watch tells us nothing.
One question. Sorry to interrupt, but one quick question about on the slide here. You have an ice axe that says 200 yards, and then it says ice axe 250 yards. Are there two?
Yes, that's correct. No, there was only one, but the distance from the first step was reported at different distances. In fact, by the same person, Hugh Rutledge of the 1933 expedition, at different times. Reported the ice axe to be 200 or 250 yards from the first step. And I personally believe, according to photographs I've studied, that the 200 is more likely to be correct.
Okay.
But I would like, if I can just...
Go ahead.
If I can stay on that slide just another half a minute, I think there's a very important inference to be made from the position of Mallory's body, and that is that he could not have fallen from the location of the ice axe. It is not physically possible for him to have fallen from either of those locations because he is at least 100 meters, maybe 150 meters to the northeast of the fall line.
Right.
If you look at where the ice axe was found, where he was found, and you see the contours, a falling body has to fall perpendicular to the contours. He could not have fallen from the ice axe location to the place where he was found.
Right. Yeah, that is clear. It cannot fall diagonally. We fall straight down perpendicular to the contour lines, as you said. And some people might say, well, the ice axe belonged to Irvine, and therefore it could indicate where he fell. But let's speak about Irvine. Let's bring on the next fascinating slide, which is showing the boot of Irvine, and his real foot was inside the boot. And by the way, I was just doing a review of Reinhold Messner's book, and he talks about the recovery of his brother's body about 35 years after the event, his Gunther Messner, and they found him decapitated. And I think in fact more than one of his body parts was actually dismembered to some extent, and they just used DNA to recover him. And that really made me think about Irvine, that a lot of people might be thinking that it was a catastrophic fall, but maybe his body was completely whole when he fell into the glacier 100 years ago. And the glacier is just kind of like a washing machine or a churning device, just kind of like crushes human bodies and pulls human bodies apart, just like Gunther Messner, his body happened to him, who was caught in an avalanche. And So the same thing may very well be that Irvine is sadly in pieces if we ever do recover the rest of his remains. Now here we have a fascinating slide that Jimmy Chin, who was photographed in the photo with the boot, was wearing reflective sunglasses. And clever detectives like you decide to zoom in on those glasses and see what was he looking at. You could see some of the National Geographic team members, potentially the photographer himself, kneeling with Jimmy Chin. And behind him, you can kind of get a sense of where the photograph was taken. But we know, again, we're focusing on what we know. We know that this was his foot. That's one thing we know. And we know it was found in Central Roebuck Glacier. That's what we know. But the precise location, how he fell, how he got there, all that stuff, I suppose we don't know, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And this is indeed the most recent element of what we know. The discovery is extremely poorly documented, and I think intentionally so. And I was obliged, therefore, to do these exercises in detection, which you described. And I don't claim any credit for this idea. It's not even an original idea on my part. It came up on one of the forums, and I simply picked up the ball and ran with it. So what I deduced from the very, very little information that National Geographic disclosed was that Jimmy Chin in that image was sitting or squatting on a moraine. You can clearly see that's a moraine. And it's also a very narrow moraine because you can see ice walls both to the left and to the right of him, which means he's not on a lateral moraine, that's to say a moraine at the edge of the glacier. He is in what they call a medial moraine, which some glaciers have, including the Central Rongbuk. And there are points in the Central Rongbuk where that medial moraine is very narrow. So that gave me an idea of where most likely this photograph was taken. And I've published in various places my estimate as to where that was. And as a backup to that, those mathematics, as you said, it's possible to look at the reflected image in Jimmy Chin's sunglasses, and you can see a ridge behind those four members of the team. There are various applications available to climbers, including Peak Finder, Peak Fizer, and also I think there's a German version, which enable you to pick any point on Earth, take a heading where you like, and that will reproduce the view that you see using data from Google Earth. I did this exercise, and I tried various points on the medial moraine, and tried to match up as closely as I could with a ridge, the ridge that you see in the sunglasses, where that ridge most likely was. And I reached what you might call a working assumption or a working inference as to where that image was taken. My best estimate at the moment is that it was about 6.5 kilometers from the head of the glacier. In other words, where the mountain at the foot of the north face, where the glacier begins, that's the head of the glacier. The glacier then travels about 2 kilometers westward, then makes a right-hand turn and goes northwards. You draw a line about 6.5 kilometers down at the center of the glacier, and I think that's where they took the photograph.
Right. Yeah, that's part of what we know, and or at least we have a little bit of sense. Now, in the last minute that we have, roughly, let's briefly talk about what we don't know. And one thing, a lot of people think that they know that they made it to the summit, or they know that they didn't. One thing we certainly do not know is that we do not know if Mallory and Irvine made it to the summit, or one of them, or both of them. And we simply do not know. And for those who say, no, we do know, absolutely we do know, it's either X or Y. like, no, we don't know. And just because I asked, do you know that Mount Everest exists? That we know. We know Mount Everest exists. If you don't have that level of certainty, the fact that we're debating this 100 years later and we're talking about, and there's an actual debate, there's no debate about whether Mount Everest exists, but there is a debate about whether Mallory and Irvine made it to the summit. So this slide kind of sums up the key things. In 1 minute, can you kind of summarize the key takeaway?
Yes, I guess I can in 1 minute. Essentially, we do not know Mallory's and Irvine's route from the moment that they left high camp. I'm sorry, from the moment they left Camp 4. We can say that we pretty much know how they got to Camp 5. Camp 5 was a known location. We pretty much do not know at all where they went after Camp 5. An assumption existed that they went to Norton's and Somerville's Camp 6. I believe they must have passed it, but I believe they did not spend the night in Norton's Camp 6. I believe they set up a higher camp further up the mountain. Where that camp was, we do not know. How they got from that camp to the point where Odell saw them, we do not know. Where they went after that, we do not know. And as you say, we do not know whether they reached the summit. We do not know any timings associated with this entire journey, except for their departure from Camp 4. Nothing else we know whatsoever, not a single time. Not when they left Camp 5, not when they passed Camp 6, not when they left their high camp. And how they subsequently, wherever the high point was that they reached, how did they then reach the point where they were found? That's to say, how did Mallory reach the point where his body was found, and how did Irvine's boot reach the point where the boot was found? We do not know.
Right. We will talk about the hypotheses of the climb, which is one of the more exciting parts, in our future episode. So again, Robert Edwards, thank you so much for your announcing that you're coming out with a brand new book about Irvine that's going to be focusing on his life and how he got to be where he ended up. And just tune in make sure you subscribe to the WanderLearn Show to get every episode featuring Robert Edwards and his fabulous book. Go down to the description to get his book that discusses the whole climb in far more detail than you saw here, and also check out the previous podcast that we did with him. Thank you again, Dr. Robert Edwards.
Thank you, Francis. It's been, as always, a pleasure. Thank you very much.